Hello, everyone, and welcome back to All Aboard with Rob Belliveau. I'm Rob Belliveau, and super excited to have this guest today with us, all the way from Alberta, Afton Brazzoni. How are you, Afton?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me, Rob. I'm excited to be here.
We it This is an interesting one when I was getting ready for this conversation because I had to do some math on dates. I had to think about, what we're going to talk about here to keep our listeners engaged, and all of our episodes we try to give them one or two things to leave with, as like we do in learning, leave them with something that they know a little bit more about. And I thought, our conversation could actually go pretty expansive here given our histories, but um, we'll talk a bit more about what you're doing now, but I thought we'd go down memory lane and just go back all those, I think it was 13 years ago
Yes.
when you were a student at Nova Scotia Community College, using Brightspace, which we always joke about. Everyone on the podcast has something to do with Brightspace, and you're not a client of ours. You're not a user of Brightspace with us, but that's the one tie-in that I was able to kind of bring into this. And you were a student doing a project, and we connected over that. Do you remember those days?
Yes, I do. Yeah. So I was completing my public relations diploma
Mhm.
at Nova Scotia Community College. This was in 2011-12. And yeah, you and the team at the fire department had been sort of mock clients of ours
Yeah,
for a media training project.
yeah, yeah. Mock client. I felt like a mock student, to be honest with you, during that. A little fish out of water. You helped us build a really awesome communications training program for our frontline officers, and ever since we've stayed in touch. And I think this kind of lesson, like one for our listeners today, that I wanted to kind of go into in our worlds that are still colliding. The power of networking and keeping professional relationships, and keeping those ties. You never know where they're all going to come back together, and here we are today doing a podcast about storytelling and education. And I just thought it was neat to tie that all together from almost 13 years ago.
Yeah, I think that's a really big lesson or big takeaway. And it's something that I always say to people. My entire business has been built on relationships and people. And whether that's, folks like you who I've known from sort of previous lives
Mhm.
or even just since I've started the business. And I think that for anyone in any field, whether they're an entrepreneur or founder, or whether they're working with inside a company, I think that relationships are what it's going to take you forward and something to really, really nurture.
Absolutely. And so public relations, community college, now Scribe National, entrepreneur, you founded your company, you're off and running. What happened in the middle there? How
Yeah.
did you get here? How did you get here?
Yes, I'm happy to share that. Yeah, so I founded Scribe National back in 2019. So as of this recording, we're actually about to turn 6 this year, or this
Hey.
month actually, which will be, very exciting.
Yeah.
But in the meantime of that, so from I guess about 2012 to 2019, I did start out in communications after finishing that public relations diploma. So I was working at Dalhousie University, which I imagine some of the listeners at least will be familiar with
Yep.
that being a large institution in
Another
Halifax.
Brightspace client, we'll just say, another tie into Brightspace, a good one there.
Yeah, so I was there on their marketing and communications team, and from there I went into more of a marketing role at BAM Center in Alberta because I had moved out here in 2013. Moved back here actually. I had lived here a bit previously. So I was working on the marketing team there. I had a few different roles in marketing off and on. Actually, I had worked at BAM Center at two different times over the span of 6 years. I
Mhm.
had also been the editor of a travel magazine.
Oh, fun.
Yeah, it was based in the Canadian Rockies, really great location to
Whoa, that's
learn
tough.
about.
That's tough.
Oh yeah, it was hard. I don't really know how I got through that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so tough to, be able to go to all these awesome places in the mountains and restaurants and activities. But yeah, so I did that, and then also a small stint for a small husband and wife owned agency, and I'm actually still in touch with them, and we still work together
Wow,
today.
that's cool.
that was sort of what got me into kind of understanding what it was like to run a small business. And yeah, so with all of those different experiences in marketing and communications combined, I decided to start Scribe National in 2019. I was actually still working at BAM Center at the time, and they were really generous, let me go down to part time hours. And then, of course, 6 months into all of that, COVID happened.
Wow.
Yeah. So
Man.
it was, and I think, didn't you get into entrepreneurship around the same time as well?
Yep. Yeah, it was, summer, fall of 2020 was the beginnings of Neon Train, technically incorporated, I think, also August or September of 2020. But really the full leap was January of 2021, where, yes, I also, left my very comfortable, successful job in Halifax Fire to start Neon Train. So we're on similar paths across the other sides of the country doing about the same thing.
Yeah, yeah, and crazy times really to jump into business, and especially, in the online world, things were just booming, and we really just hit the ground running at Scribe. And I had brought on the first contract writers as the first team members that very summer in 2020. And we've just been going ever since. And so today I've got a team of about 8 writers, all still contract, but working together day in, day out. Some of them have been with me since almost the beginning. And then we're a boutique content marketing agency. So we're typically working with about 15 to 20 clients at a time.
Awesome. And so content marketing. So, what is Scribe National? What is content marketing? What tell our listeners here, what exactly is that?
Yeah. So, what I like to say about Scribe National really is we exist to tell stories. And so, although we are a content marketing agency, and I'll define that, what it really comes down to is that we are connecting businesses and their customers, which are typically for us other businesses. So, we work in the B2B space. We're connecting them through story. And so, content marketing essentially is the production of, it could be written content, which is our specialty. It could be video. This podcast is actually an excellent example of content marketing. It's marketing that doesn't simply put an ad in front of a person and, sort of have an output only type message. It's actually the type of marketing that engages in two-way interaction. And it's really rooted in story and those kind of editorial principles that I bring from my own journalism days. I actually did that prior to the public relations. But it's all focused on engagement, interaction, and storytelling.
Mhm. Great segue, because we talk about storytelling, and Neon Train recently was working with you and your team to do some storytelling of some of our learning providers and their success stories. Success stories are something you do as one of those content pieces all the time. And some of our listeners out there might be entrepreneurs, might be managers in companies, and thinking about this, saying, how does this help me? How could this help me? um, the power and impact of storytelling when it comes to things like success stories. You know, how do you see that landscape right now, and where do you see the biggest impact in a company potentially investing in time and money with you to craft those?
Yeah, this is huge. And I think it's always been critical, but I think today there seems to be even more of sort of this trust deficit or just kind of this uncertainty. And I think what success stories do is they allow your customer to really share their own experience, of course, but also to speak a bit about your product. And it's always more valuable and it always carries more weight when something like that is coming from a customer because, our companies, of course, have our credibility in our own ways. But when we're speaking about ourselves and speaking about our product, there is just a little bit more credibility and, I guess, reliability of the message when it's coming from a
Yeah,
customer who's actually had
yeah.
firsthand experience.
Yeah, I'm coming soon. Hopefully, folks will see them soon. We're really excited to have that as part of our content marketing strategy now, with again your work and your help. And I think what's interesting when you talk about the story versus the ad, it's really easy to say so and so does X or this system will do Y, and it's a very kind of outcome based result. But I think the storytelling fills a void in the middle of how they got there and the trust or the business relationship that enabled those statistics to get on a page, which more often than not are, I think, probably the more important things that are really hard to represent in a static ad.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think it comes down to things like with the success stories, there is someone inside that company who's been interviewed and who's sharing their personal experience. And we always say this with any B2B, and again, that's business to business marketing for anyone who's unfamiliar. We always say that it's actually human to human because there is that person inside the team who was struggling with whatever challenge they had before they sought out the solution and before they in this particular example, before they
Hmm.
implemented
Hmm.
Neon Train. But for listeners, if you're
Yeah.
thinking about any of this, it's someone who found your company and what was their actual personal struggle that they were dealing with inside their job. And so it's so much more than can ever be communicated in
Hmm.
something like an ad. And not to say that that doesn't have its place, but I think this just really gets to the human element of things.
Yeah, no, it really does, and that human element then changes opinions, it changes thoughts, it moves a dial, which great little segue into education, which is another area. Obviously, is our core area where getting information online, conveying it, teaching people concepts, ideas, things that they didn't previously know. It's moving, it's moving a dial, and, when I look at that and we look at, building content for education versus building marketing content, or what many would consider as marketing content, your aspect that you bring in, your strengths around the storytelling, really could and will have a really impact on educational modality, won't it?
They do. And yeah, I'm actually involved in both as well because I often do facilitation, speaking, workshops, just really helping people understand the foundational building blocks of things like content marketing, of things like branding, right? And so, yeah, I think that it kind of comes down to sort of knowing your audience, of course, and just knowing the purpose of the content, and
Yeah.
sometimes that is more marketing focused and sometimes it is more education focused, but
Hmm.
their storytelling is central to all of them because the key in the end is keeping the audience engaged
Yeah.
so that they can either take an action, in the marketing
Hmm.
world often
Yeah.
it's related to purchase, or so that they actually come away with a concrete learning.
With the learning, right? Which then both boosts their confidence, boosts their stability, and maybe makes that call to action a little easier to do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%.
The talking about training, education, storytelling, coming in today, thinking about listeners out there that may have material for traditional marketing type purposes, but in the course area, we work with different courses in compliance areas of health and safety, financial literacy, areas we would probably most consider to be fairly dry if you think of the textbook versions we grew up on. um, Tell us a little bit about how you might work with somebody who has in their mind or our mind really dry content. How does your process in your company, how could it lift that? How can it infuse elements of storytelling and more creative writing to bring that content to life in a way that maybe we're not all used to seeing all the time?
That's a great question, and I would say that it is something we're very familiar with because we are working primarily in the tech space. And while, you think of tech, you do think of innovation, excitement, but on the other hand, there are also some
A
concepts
lot
that
of
are
jargon, a lot of
yeah,
jargon.
yeah, and, like IT, some
Yeah,
really, really technical
yeah,
concepts,
yeah,
cybersecurity, things that are just, a little bit more of a slog to get through
yeah,
sometimes,
yeah.
you could say. And so this does come up. And I think that, again, it actually goes back to the human element, right? Because instead of just discussing, for instance, the features of a technology, we're really looking at real life applications of things. And so anytime that you can paint a picture, that you can share a real world example, and that you can tell a story in that way, you're really placing either the reader, the listener, or the viewer, depending on your content format, you're really placing them in the middle of that story. So instead of just talking about the feature, you talk about how this was actually used
Used, yeah.
in a day-to-day basis, right? And also, very importantly, what was the benefit or the outcome of that? Because
Right.
that's what's always going to hook people in.
Yes, it's really like telling the journey, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and especially when it comes to tech, it can be really easy to sort of get caught in the trap of wanting to discuss things like features,
Mhm.
but it's always about the person behind it. How did they use this? What were they able to achieve?
Mhm. Mhm. Do you have any other really good before and after examples without disclosing anything confidential or sensitive of one of these kind of transformations that you went into thinking, "Oh, I'm not even sure how I'm going to elevate this content," and at the end of it you were like, "We did it. High five." That's a good moment.
That's a great question. Yeah, I mean, we see it all the time, but I think one example, for instance, is actually in the construction industry. And so
Mhm.
we were brought in. There was a company that was actually 50 years old. And so
Wow.
we were brought in to help with brand messaging. And it was kind of interesting because oftentimes we're brought in with brand messaging in a startup situation
Mhm. Mhm.
rather than something that's actually been established. But sometimes an organization can be going for such a long time and not really realize, okay, we actually need to update this
Mhm.
and look at this again. And so I would say in that example, it wasn't so much about maybe jargon, but it was just about the fact that this type and our brand messaging, of course, is always rooted in storytelling,
Yeah.
just like our
Mhm.
success stories. And so this type of a project or an engagement can really breathe new life into an organization. And it's just about being intentional about the way you're speaking about something. And so for that, is similarly to what we do with the success stories, of course, we're interviewing their customers and we're bringing this up to date with the language that their customers are using today to speak about their challenges and
Yeah.
desires.
It's almost like a 360 review. You're getting the feedback from internal, external, and that third party kind of view was really often really powerful.
Yes. Yeah, and I would say that's so key, right? Like getting the feedback not only from internal, but yes, but also from the external stakeholders, whether it's a customer, a partner, someone else, and then of
Mhm.
course putting our own objective lens on that.
Yeah, we being in year 5 as well as a tech company, we struggle sometimes with things that we know are common terminology, common language, or common practice. And we've been in it so long now, we kind of get a little bit of groupthink that we don't see our own mess that we might be creating with some of our content and some of our material. And I always like to have that outside view because I could sit here for 5 hours and try to find it and maybe find part of it, but maybe working with a company like yours, you have it for half an hour and bam, it's right there. Mm.
Yeah, and I'll say that even applies to me. Like, it's just so useful, even though I do this for a living. Like, I can do that for someone else's business in such a short time. But when it comes to doing that for your own, it is always tough. And so I think just having another set of eyes, and especially when someone's trained to do that, it
Mhm,
really does help just uncover things, uncover insights, speed things
mhm.
up.
Just yeah. It's yeah, it's super powerful and some of the stuff that you've provided for us reminds me of that. So for listeners out there, having that third party lens is really important. And in courseware building, we do the same thing when we're working with our learning providers to build courses. Those subject matter experts who know their stuff, they know their material. We have a quality assurance practice that we work with them to get outsiders but related in their industry to give it a review because it gives that outside thought that the people sometimes just don't see themselves, right?
Yes, subject matter experts are, I think, critical to everything. And even for all of the content we write, well, probably 90% of it, we're interviewing subject matter experts, even when it's something like an article, just because there's something very powerful when you pair someone that's trained in how to create content with
Mhm.
the subject matter expert themselves.
Right.
And that's when you get the best output.
Yeah. It absolutely is, and for us building online courses, it's kind of the same but different kind of vein of content creation. So if we have folks out there listening today that are thinking about building a course or their first course, or they've built courses before but they haven't heard of kind of content marketing or communication kind of strategies like what we've talked about today for the first time, what would be like a storytelling technique or an approach that they could implement to make their content a little more engaging for that first course they're looking to build?
Yeah, I would say one of the biggest things is to get their key messaging nailed down. And so even even for a course, right? It's a little bit different than them having their public facing marketing, but it
Hmm.
still needs that brand messaging
Hmm.
because you want to have continuity for the learners, and that can really anchor in everything. So, and I would also say, certainly I'm not as proficient in designing a course as you would be, but I do think for people, like, anchoring around one key idea
Hmm.
is really, really powerful because communication can become diluted or confusing if you're trying to communicate too many points,
Yeah, yeah.
and so I think that helps also have the message sink in.
Yeah, we root that with learning objectives, obviously, in education, which is kind of like keeping that on brand or on point. And interesting, a lot of talk now around those key points, and it's in a kind of an interesting, different spin, and it's around our ability to keep people's attention span to even start, some type of learning, or in your case, some type of communication path for a relevant amount of time. And we think about things now like micro courses, micro credentials, micro learning. The days of 2 3 hour courses are pretty much gone. They're 10, 15, 22 minutes, and it keeps the attention span. And maybe you have more courses because you have that much content, but you're chunking it in a more reasonable size. Do you see the same kind of impacts with some of the work you're doing for conveying content?
Yeah, absolutely. I think content really runs the gamut. So we actually are a long form content company, and I would say that the success stories that we worked on with you would fall into that category.
Mhm.
However, that being said, it's not like it's a book. It's
No,
still
no, no.
something
Yeah,
that
yeah,
could probably take someone
yeah,
about 10 minutes to read.
yeah.
But yeah, that is very true. I think that today content should really be looked at as an ecosystem. So for instance, I'll use the example of the success story.
Mhm,
With something like that, you have your anchor long form piece that you've created,
mhm.
whether that's written or in video. And then from there, the ideal scenario would actually be to sort of slice that up into smaller pieces of content. You don't have to go back to the drawing board by any
Yeah.
means because you already have the asset. But what you're doing is getting perhaps email copy out of that. Perhaps you're getting social posts out of that.
Mhm.
There's numerous things you can do with that. And again, because it's tying back to the original key messages that were in that success story or whatever type of content you're looking at,
Mhm.
you're reinforcing the message over and over. And that's why repurposing is really, really powerful.
Yeah. No, it use create once, use many times, right? And even here on the podcast, we'll be able to get quotes and snippets from here that can be used for many things like social posts and etc. So it's definitely an awesome strategy. It can be a lot to manage, though. It can be a lot, especially for a smaller entrepreneur type company.
Yes, it can be a lot to manage. I think organization and calendars and everything like that is really
Mhm.
key. And then I would say the other thing, and this probably applies to the learning side as well, is really what is the purpose of this content? What is like, what
Mhm.
either do you want someone to say, think, feel, or do after they have consumed this content?
Yeah.
And so I think again, like just having that clear objective, one key idea, clear outcome, keeping it as simple as possible is really the way to actually have that message get through to the person on the other
Sure.
side.
Yeah, absolutely. We're almost at time, which there's so many other areas I would want to go into today, but I thought it might be neat to kind of cap off with something a little less about content or even e-learning and more about the entrepreneurial journey. So,
Oh, yes.
as you look back now in year 6, congratulations. We have a lot of folks that we work with that are also entrepreneurs or solopreneurs looking to build that first course and do some type of business development in course delivery and training delivery. Um, Starting a company sounds easy, but we know from at least 4 or 5 years in, it's not. What would Afton today want to tell Afton 6 years ago equating to some of our listeners today who are maybe thinking about starting a company in education or any discipline really, what are a couple of those lessons you wish you could have told yourself?
This is such a great question. It's also a topic I could speak about for a long time, but I think to keep it somewhat succinct, I would say that you have to trust the journey. And what I mean by that is if I were able to see now all of the things that can be accomplished in 6 years,
Mhm,
in those early moments of impatience or uncertainty, I would have been able to tell myself that it will all unfold, and
mhm.
some of the things that I never even imagined would happen, and I'm referring to the good things.
Yeah, yeah,
Obviously,
yeah.
there's been some not so good ones as
Yeah.
well, but, all of those amazing milestones that I never even could have imagined would have happened, they have. And also now I know that more will come. And I think you just have to be more patient than you probably want to be. And you really have to trust yourself, the business, the people around you more than you might feel comfortable doing.
Mhm, mhm. That is so true. If I think back 5 years ago and to now of, trusting that journey, and I think also rooted in that is a little bit of maybe my opinion on that would be also stick to what you went in it for and be really good at that, and don't let other opportunities distract you from what you believe your mission is, because I feel a lot of times out of the gate you start trying to chase that extra little paycheck or that extra account, but it's not part of your core delivery, and you can kind of lose yourself in that pretty quick.
Yes. Yeah, and I think a lot of entrepreneurs, and I certainly fit in with this, are people with lots of ideas. It's easy to get distracted, and that
Mhm.
is so true, Rob, that you just really have to keep coming back to that North Star of, and that's why I said at the beginning, we exist to tell stories, and I would have said that back to you in 2019.
Yeah, yeah.
That hasn't changed.
Well, and that's why you're still here 6 years later. You're sticking to your North Star. Um, Thank you so much. This is I feel like this podcast has been a story today in and of itself, and it's really cool to be having you on today, given our past and our future, which is hopefully still going to continue on. Uh, Thank you.
Yeah, it's been so much fun. And yeah, you make such a great point. And I do want to just highlight that for people again, that you never know. You just really have to put the time and the effort and the care into your relationships because you
Hmm.
never know where they're gonna go. And if you had told me back when we first met, we would be sitting here recording this, I wouldn't have been able to believe it. But it's been so great working with you, and it's been a lot of fun to be on here today.
Awesome. Well, if anyone out there would like to hear more or learn more from Afton, you can drop us an email at allaboard@neontrain.com, and we can connect you to her and her awesome team and services. Thanks again, Afton, very much. And to listeners out there, appreciate your time today, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks so much. Take care.